Welcome in. It's the Lions247 Podcast. I'm Tyler Donohue. He is Sean Fitz. We're rolling in through the last week of March now. Spring ball well underway for Penn State practice number 3 coming up on Saturday. A big recruiting day here on campus coming up on Saturday. We'll talk about that. Let's discuss the pro day results that took place on Thursday. All 32 NFL franchises sent some kind of a representative ranging from head coach to scouts to State College on Thursday to watch a dozen plus Penn State players put on a show. In one case, it was a former walk-on who turned the most heads. We got some former All Big Ten players to discuss as well with their draft stock. But Sean, we begin in the transfer portal because last episode, one of the topics of discussion that we left off on was the status of the twin North Texas transfer tandem, Gabriel and Grayson Murphy. Were they heading to UCLA? Was Penn State going to make a late move here? What say you as we get to the end of the week now?
Well, it was some fun drama while it lasted, but it sounds like they're going to end up at UCLA. The spring quarter opened up on Wednesday. Their classes start on Monday. We expect them to enroll. There was one of those ones where the UCLA staff was kind of sitting on pins and needles waiting for this one to happen. But as happens in the transfer portal nowadays, you've got many moving pieces, including NIL, which is something that we're going to talk about here in a second with Penn State. But that's a part where I think that, you look at what they brought in last year compared to what they brought in this year, and that's an added dynamic that we really didn't take into account. So Penn State limited on the transfer front this year, going to lose out on the Murphy twins to UCLA, and it's kind of starting over. You look at what's out there. There's not a ton out there, but you expect a wave after spring ball. Is that wave going to be featuring players that are good enough to play at Penn State? I don't know. How will Penn State feel about its own roster is another dynamic you have to throw into here. We know that they're short on numbers at linebacker. We know that they're short on numbers on the offensive line, but where does that stand coming out of it? I think those are some things that we'll have to think about over the next couple of weeks and potentially months. On the good side, Hunter Norzad is coming in this weekend for just an unofficial visit to check things out, and he was a very big pickup for Penn State in the transfer portal. Of course, Mitchell Tinsley on campus already, but so far this month, it's kind of stalled. You hoped, just getting the Murphy twins on campus the week before they were supposed to go to UCLA, you might be able to entice them and throw in a switch here. But there were a couple things at play here that did not work out in Penn State's favor.
Yeah, at Pro Day on Thursday, just after the testing and stuff, I had a chance to go speak with a few of those guys who transferred in last year. It was Eric Wilson, offensive guard, Arnold Ebiketie, defensive end, and of course Derek Tangelo at defensive tackle. And I was thinking about that yesterday a little bit. 35 combined starts for those three players and for Penn State last year, and how important each of them were, regardless of how you think they individually performed. They played a lot of football for the Nittany Lions last season. And then I thought about what is on the field right now for this team going through spring ball and spring practice. And it's just one guy. It's Mitchell Tinsley coming in after a fantastic season, of course, with a potent passing game with Western Kentucky, but no additions on the defensive side of the football with a new defensive coordinator there. And that is one thing that hasn't matched expectations for this offseason. Certainly it hasn't been for lack of trying in some instances. We continue to talk about the perimeter of the offensive line, some of the tackles out there, who else might surface as spring camps come to a close. It's going to be important to see because I think that time has told us once you get through that opening stage of May, you pretty much know who's coming in and what's feasible for August.
Oh, absolutely. And you're kind of limiting yourself to Norzad at this point. And, hopefully you can find a linebacker. I mean, it's just to me, waiting till the end. And I say waiting till the end. I think it's kind of just that's a bad way to put it, because it makes it seem like Penn State's just been sort of hanging around and waiting for the right guy to enter. And they have to some extent, but you're going to put yourself in a bad situation by waiting for a guy that goes through spring practice or that goes through and is trying to do what an Ebiketie did last year and improve his status as a potential NFL prospect or something like that. I think you're just playing a numbers game at that point. And it's probably not going to come out in your favor. And when that guy does, or if that guy does go into the transfer portal, everybody else is circling as well. So you better have some stuff prepared. You better have your ability to go in and sell, not only elevating their profile, but also figuring out what you can do in this modern age of college football. And, I think Penn State took a step forward this week and in getting into the NIL game. It's a spot. I mean, if you look at the Murphy twin situation, there are certain places in which this program was hamstrung, and NIL was a big part of it. I know that there was some admission stuff that did not go as smoothly as they had hoped. So there are a couple of things that maybe a situation like this exposes that Penn State is playing catch up, and the success with Honor NIL that came out this week, I think that's their best shot. You look at the names involved in that, not only with the backing of Ira Lubert and folks like that, but also getting prominent former athletes like LeVar Arrington, and you just go down the list, and it's a really good group, a really good group for exposure. And I think that's really what they need to get in gear, because I think the majority of Penn State fans, and certainly if you're listening to this podcast, if you're taking the time to spend your extra time seeking out information like this podcast, this probably doesn't affect you. But most Penn State fans, even a lot of them that show up on Saturdays at Beaver Stadium, aren't going to understand what's going on in this game. So it's a really, really big step forward. And as they continue to get to establish themselves in the NIL market as a collective, then I think that will certainly help. But Penn State's playing some big time catch up right now.
Yeah, Mark Brennan wrote a story up on Lions247.com earlier in the week. He did get a bit of commentary from LeVar Arrington, who is part of this collaborative effort, just on the growth that is necessary for the institution. If you listen to this show pretty consistently, Brandon Short, former All-American here at Penn State, he had a lot of strong things to say. He's an influential member of this community. Clearly, he was on board in making sure that Penn State, it doesn't have to get in a situation where they dig themselves too deep of a hole. Big Ten conference alone, much less the Power 5 landscape, things are moving at such a rapid pace, and you're hearing guys make decisions coming out of the transfer portal about this with NIL on their mind. And I mean, with more prevalence, you're hearing about it at the high school level, especially some of the marquee names out there. NIL is on the table as part of that topic of discussion when it didn't exist there on that table, at least in the light just a few years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, NIL and NLI, the National Letter of Intent, being right beside each other, I know that just almost tripped you up. I know it's gotten me a few times as well, but that's ridiculous. But that's a spot where it's interesting because they've established this collective, they've established a plan going forward, and it's very important to note that the school can't do any of this. This does not come from Sandy Barber, James Franklin, anybody in that athletic administration. You have to work sort of hand in hand with that, and that's a really tough thing for people to understand, that you just can't throw money at players from the program or ticket sales or merchandising rights or anything like that. It's all got to go through something else, and that's the tough part for people to understand. And it's a new landscape. It's a new frontier, and several schools have jumped headfirst into it. Penn State was not one of them. And like I said, it's remarkable that Penn State has done as well as they've done recruiting wise, especially at the quarterback position. You look at what happened this week, and with Tennessee, that's the rumored destination for big time 5-star quarterback Nico out of California. And you can bet there's a lot of dollars involved there, a lot of future dollars involved there. So that's for Penn State to lock up the number one quarterback in the last cycle without having any sort of particular plan in place. It's downright remarkable. I'm sorry. I'm just to process that is something. So yeah, they got to play catch up, and it's interesting because all these schools are going full speed ahead, and you can get to try and play catch up, but that's a long trail to forge here.
I think it must have been refreshing for some of our listeners out there when they heard Drew Aller on with us, and you asked him, where's your head at with all this? Are you going to try to jump at opportunities? We were talking about Quinn Ewers, and he was like, it's kind of not really. I just want to get to campus and start working out and watch film and see what it's like as a college kid, and then I'll figure it out from there. I mean, maybe is he costing himself some money in the short term, perhaps? But yeah, Drew didn't show up to campus, doing the product placement, Wayne's World all over with drinks and what he's wearing. But hey, throw a few touchdown passes, and people could be beating down your door. And that's where the allure of playing at a program like Penn State, we heard it yesterday, when they have a pro day, 32 NFL franchises show up. You want Penn State to make sure that they're in that upper echelon of NIL opportunities. And as you have documented quite a bit here on the podcast, that is something that, with James Franklin signing a 10-year contract extension, was obviously part of the forefront of his vision for the future.
Yeah, and they're going to switch some people around and in the office and try and figure out and make this more of a priority. Not that it's not a priority, but it wasn't something you spent time on because you worked in an office. I mean, there's nothing that when it's not part of the rule book, there's really nothing you can do about it. Now there's something you can do about it, so they're working through that. And going back to your point about Drew, it's about finding the right kids, absolutely. But I think that pool of finding the right kids, when they see a guy that's on their similar, plateau of quarterbacks or whatever position they're at getting paid, they're going to look and say, why aren't I getting a piece of that? So that pool is going to shrink mightily over the next couple of years. And you go from finding the right guy to finding the guy that you can make the most out of. And that's a tough way to go about it. So we'll see what happens. And that's kind of the way with a lot of things. I mean, you look at this is not NIL related, but you look at what happens if Zane Durant is a senior this year, and you've got a situation where you've got Miami with a new coach, you've got Florida with a new coach. That changes things. So it's kind of like on that parallel where you're trying to figure out the right timing for the right prospects, but you're gonna find out that probably doesn't align as much as you had hoped.
You can go down a long path with this kind of a conversation, and plenty of people have in college football. We'll continue to monitor it and see how Penn State reacts and evolves and adjusts. It's going to play a huge role in the transfer portal, in recruiting, in program development. So get used to that. Just in case you missed it earlier this week, we covered it with a pretty long episode, the opening of spring practice. There was some media coverage on Monday on campus. James Franklin spoke with us. We were out on the practice field for about 20 minutes. A lot of coverage on Lions247.com. But if you missed that last podcast, we kind of got into full gear with spring ball. We'll talk about that a lot more next week. But this week, Pro Day was in the spotlight, Sean. And, there are several players right now for Penn State that could go in the first couple of days, maybe multiple in round one. But it was a former walk-on who stole the spotlight on Thursday. Hello, Drew Hartlaub, a 4.22 in the 40-yard dash.
I'm smiling. He's a special teams ace. I love watching Drew Hartlaub play the last couple of years. Touch base with him a couple of weeks ago to see if maybe he was going to take another year and go somewhere else and maybe finish out his career. But no, he's going to give it a go as a pro. It's going to be tough. He's 5'11", 170. I mean, you look at what Dan Chisena did a couple of years ago, where he ran a really fast time as well, and obviously has the track background. Dan Chisena is like 6'2", 6'3". So that changes some things for him. Drew was, of course, a reserve safety, but was tremendous as a gunner. I remember watching Drew as a freshman, or after his freshman year at Dallastown, coming up to, Southwestern. I apologize. Somebody's going to get mad at me for that. But at Southwestern, coming up to camp and just doing a broad jump over 10 foot. I was like, where is this kid coming from? And it was awesome to see. But that athleticism has always been there. He had the 10.9 broad, the 4.22 40, the 4.15 shuttle, and the 6.75 L drill. He said he was on the radar of a couple of teams. And, that's, I don't want to sound so surprised when I say that, but this is a guy that really hasn't played aside from special teams, but that's the way he's going to make his money. If he's going to find his way into a camp or something like that, I think it'd be awesome. I'd take a chance on him because you don't have that kind of speed floating around. What do you do with him? Do you stash him away as a fifth receiver? I don't know how that's going to work, but the kid's earned a shot, and it's awesome to see.
He did say he had a little bit of regret yesterday, if you can imagine it, just because he felt like he wanted to get some work in with the wide receiver drills. That didn't happen. Safety was not where he was involved for Penn State. It was on the special teams coverage. Showed that fearlessness, of course, combined with his speed to do what he did as a gunner. I think my favorite part about his 40-yard dash time was just the complete lack of surprise when it was brought up to any one of his teammates. Like, I think a lot of us in the media were running to these guys, whether it's Arnold Ebiketie or Jesse Luketa, and saying, did you see what Drew did in the 40? And they're like, yeah, duh. Like, this is what the guy does. He's a freak. We've all known this. A lot of respect for him, and a really cool story that emerged, obviously, Sean. And we'll see if it works out for him. But like you said, there's a discrepancy there in the size between him and Chisena. I know there's a lot of connections and lines to be drawn there, and they got to replace this guy. And you had AJ Lighton out there last year, so that gunner role is interesting. I'll just pass along something that Drew gave us, a few names. He said Daquan Hardy. He had mentioned also Malik Mega, which is pretty fascinating to think about him roaming down the field as a gunner. He kind of could have been confused for an edge rusher when I saw Malik Mega on the field yesterday, wide receiver for Penn State.
Big dude, man.
Yeah. So speaking of wide receivers, of course, Jahan Dotson in the spotlight, in contention to be the first Nittany Lion off the board, in contention to be the first round one wide receiver from the Nittany Lions since 2003. Things went pretty well for him yesterday. I think that's probably understating it out there. It didn't drop a pass, looked smooth as ever, in and out of his routes. It was Sean Clifford out there playing pitch and catch with him one more time in Huluva Hall. And I think Jahan Dotson was content to let his 40-yard dash hold up from the scouting combine. He wasn't out there running. It wasn't, a lot of these guys weren't trying to top what they did at the combine. So it wasn't a fully active day for Dotson, but I thought during the position drills, did everything that he could have been asked from an NFL coaching perspective. And he was out there under the scrutiny pretty closely of assistant from the Ravens and assistant from the Patriots, but he's getting a lot of looks from a lot of teams right now. And I think what I love about things trending for Jahan Dotson is because it's shaping up, near the end of round one. And the teams that are there, if you put a Jahan Dotson on a Green Bay Packers with Aaron Rodgers, or on the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, or on the Bills with Josh Allen, I just love the way this could line up for him. And the Patriots could be in play. They need a target for Mac Jones. So I just think this is going to end well for Jahan Dotson. And of course, now he's going to go at the top of round two to a crappy franchise with a bad quarterback. Wink, wink to you, Sean. But we'll see what happens for him. I think he lands round one. I think he lands with a successful franchise.
Ouch. That was pointed. You're right about them, but that doesn't mean you have to say it. But yeah, you're building up at the end of round one for receivers to make a run, and I think that's a good thing. And that's also good for the trade value there at the end of round one or at the beginning of round two as well. And it's also funny to say after the last 20 years that we're talking about great landing spots with Green Bay, Kansas City, and Buffalo, and then we throw in the Patriots as the team that he could slum to and eventually lined up or end up with. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, I mean, I have no problem sitting on his athletic numbers. We wanted to see him run again after posting that 4.43 and knowing that he ran a 4.33 last winter in the same facility. But I mean, I think he's athletic enough, and he's shown that. And I think it was the ball drills, the routes, and everything that they were asking him to do is what they wanted to come out and see. And I don't think he disappointed. And I mean, I would hang my hat on any of those athletic numbers and the tape. I mean, you've seen the tape of Jahan Dotson. I know he's not the biggest guy out there, but he just goes out there and does so many things well on the football field. And really, that's what I think you know what you're getting in Jahan Dotson. And I say that in the absolute best way possible.
And he puts himself out there again yesterday. He told us last year in Indianapolis, he felt like he was the best wide receiver in college football. Yesterday, he said he felt like he's the best wide receiver in this upcoming draft. It is a crowded group. He's being slotted often somewhere between the 4th, 5th, 6th player off the board at that position. But there could be 5, 6, 7 guys going in round one at wide receiver, the way things may shape up. By the way, Sean, I'll say this very quietly, a little bit of buzz about Sean Clifford and his throwing yesterday. Just a little bit of buzz. Just a little bit.
All right. I'll take your word for it. You saw him throwing it around. We'll see what happens there. Hopefully he's fresh. Hopefully he's healthy. We'll see what happens this spring.
Jaquan Brisker, it was good to see him back out there, and it certainly sounded like he was feeling refreshed after what he admitted was an underwhelming experience for him in Indianapolis, because he had some back tightness pop up during bench press at the scouting combine. Couldn't get out there for positional drills. He was limited in the other testing. Came out here, and by the way, he did continue to test in Indianapolis, kind of fighting through some of that pain and discomfort. Went out there and improved upon his 40-yard dash time by 0.6 of a second, going from 4.49 down to 4.43. He felt like he was going to get below 4.4. He feels like he should be in that range. So maybe he's not even all the way back yet, but 4 inches added to that vertical jump from 34.5 to 38.5. I know he was proud of that yesterday. But really what he got to do was go out and show some of that fluidity, go out and run position work. And he's being discussed and kind of debated, I think, right now internally in some of these NFL front offices. Is he a guy that's strictly a safety? Is he a guy that you can slide as a cornerback and you play him in nickel coverage? He said 6 positions on the table right now in these conversations with NFL franchises. He feels confident in saying he can do all those jobs. And, Steelers, Eagles, a couple of teams he said multiple dialogues with, but again, a guy that you could keep an eye on there late in the first round, early in the second round, kind of on that fringe.
Yeah, you put up the numbers 4.43, 38.5-inch vertical. Of course, the 4.19 shuttle is the attention getter for me. The shuttle, typically undervalued. We love the 40. We love to see how fast these guys can run in a straight line, but the shuttle is where you show it. And that's where these guys, some of these guys, Tariq Castro Fields with a 4.06 shuttle yesterday. That's where these guys can make some money. So I thought it was interesting yesterday. Mike McCarthy of the Cowboys, Dan Quinn, the defensive coordinator of the Cowboys, showing up. They had decent success last year with a Penn State guy out of the first round.
Yeah, a little bit.
Brisker, Castro Fields, Ebiketie, is a guy that can rush any team needs a guy that can rush the passer. And then you got a guy like Brandon Smith. I think that's very interesting for the Cowboys to send that sort of clout with their franchise or from their franchise to check out prospects. You got Micah down there, and they liked how that turned out, and maybe you surround them with some of those other Penn State guys.
Jesse Luketa, not surprising, said Micah is making a push with Jerry Jones, a personal plea to bring Luketa on board with the Dallas Cowboys.
Those two close friends. By the way.
Yeah. But I mean, you make a great point. You send your defensive coordinator and head coach, and you got a lot of defensive players out there that could be intriguing to this team that needs young, affordable talent down in Dallas. And we'll find out. Arnold Ebiketie and Jesse Luketa, when they were just kind of working their way through drills and doing some downtime, Dan Quinn was sitting alongside them for a while, and there was a pretty long chat there. Jesse Luketa acknowledged a really good conversation with the Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator. You had the Eagles defensive coordinator there as well. And to me, Arnold Ebiketie went out. We wanted to see him run the 40-yard dash. That's not something that he did in Indianapolis. He did that on Thursday, went out, ran a 4.65 at just shy of 6'3", 250 pounds. Let the vertical stand, let the broad jump stand from Indianapolis. Those were high performance numbers, 38-inch vertical, a 10.8 broad. But the one that I texted to you and Mark last night that when we got these official results stood out to me, that 3-cone drill, a 6.95. That's showing something right there.
Yeah, and for reference, Jahan Dotson ran a 7.28 out in Indy at the 3-cone. I know it's probably a little bit different, but yeah, 0.2 of a second behind Drew Hartlaub in the 3-cone. That's pretty good for a guy that measured in just shy of 6'3", 247. So Arnold is a guy, I know teams are probably going to knock him for his size, but he's a guy that the production is undeniable. The tape's great, and he's testing out. He continues every time he tests, he continues to improve his numbers. So you like what's coming out of there. And like we say, everybody needs somebody that can rush the passer, and Ebiketie is a guy that's very intriguing. It's so crazy to think about. Well, you got 4 guys there in the end of round 1 or the beginning of round 2, the guys that can pop up and potentially be big time players. And I think that's really cool. I mean, you'd like to get as many guys in round 1 as possible, but just to be in that window is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I said this before. It's like a fun part of the draft is when you hit that reset button and you get ready for Friday, and then you kind of see that new big board. You could see like 4 Penn State players in that top 10 when you get up on Friday morning and start to get psyched up for rounds 2 and 3. Of course, some of these Nittany Lions hope that they already have a home by the end of Thursday night. You could see an Odafe away situation, I think, maybe for Arnold Ebiketie, where you go late, and maybe it's not necessarily a team that has a glaring need, but it could be that kind of luxury pick. You look at what edge rushers are being paid right now at a really premium price. The ability to get a guy at the tail end of round 1, maybe something worth sniffing out a trade, because you've got him under your control for a 4-year span where you know that it's going to be a pretty controlled salary.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bargain basically at that point. And you look at teams like the Titans, and they've done that before, and it's a really good opportunity for Ebiketie to be, you don't have to be the 30th pick. You can be the 38th pick or something like that and still be tremendous value. It's time to, since the draft is, in a month and 5 weeks or so, you've got, we've got to get on this one, the Nick Bowers Award for a guy that I think will be drafted, that nobody else thinks will be drafted. Derek Tangelo, I'm going to keep beating this one, just shy of 6'2", 296, 21 reps on the bench, which I thought might be a little bit higher, but a 31-inch vert, a 9.5 broad jump, and a 4.8 940, pretty explosive for a big guy. And I know this is a guy that you talk to people in the building at Lash, they love him, and they also think he's a good enough football player to be drafted, and for somebody to use a camp spot on, maybe a practice squad guy at the start. But Derek Tangelo, man, I don't know that he's a big winner of pro day, but he's a guy that's, I think, certainly probably got some people's attention on Wednesday or Thursday, excuse me.
Yeah, Tangelo was one of two guys that you could just tell looking at them before we got the official measurements that they had slimmed down a bit since we saw them in an Indy Lions uniform. The other was Ellis Brooks. He's down to 226 pounds. I believe his playing weight last year was 240 plus. And he talked a little bit. He opened up a bit about what happened last year. Said coming out of that Indiana game, had the thumb issue, spent the rest of the season with that cast on there. He actually said because he was dealing with that, it forced him to become a better fundamental football player because of what he was dealing with that cast. 100 tackles, led the team last year. He didn't play in that Outback Bowl matchup. 4.77 40-yard dash. That's not going to win over a bunch of NFL scouts, but he's a guy that I thought moved pretty well out in the position drills. I think he's also somebody that earned a lot of respect during his time here with the Penn State locker room, and we got a lot of positive feedback from these guys coming out of the event, just in terms of what the future looks like. And I thought it was really interesting to hear Ellis Brooks talk a little bit as well about Kobe King and Tyler Elsdon. He's kind of really excited to see that one. Jesse Lucetta mentioned that as well. But things move on for Penn State. But Ellis Brooks is a guy that I'm going to be curious to see because I feel like he could find a fit. And it may require him to bounce off the roster, bounce back on the roster. But for a guy that going into his senior year, I wasn't quite there with him, even though we saw some projections of him going round one last year. I think we did. But I don't know. Ellis Brooks is a guy that I think comes away yesterday in a better spot than he entered. And that was important because he didn't have the scouting combine. And he was the biggest snub. If you're going to say who was a snub, he was, because he was productive, 100 tackles in the regular season as the starting middle linebacker for Penn State, and he was left out of Indianapolis. So I thought overall positive Thursday for the linebacker.
You're already throwing dirt on my Tangelo thing with the biggest snub here. But no, Brooks was the question there is athleticism. Obviously, playing at Mike, you're not going to be able to expose that, but a 33.5 vert, good pro shuttle at 4.31, that'll work. And the same 3-cone time as Jahan Dotson, which, by the way, is really interesting because Dotson has always been known as a quick more than fast guy, and his 3-cone not very good, did not run the shuttle out in Indy. So maybe he's just completely flipped that on its head. I don't know. But Brooks is a guy that showed a little bit more athleticism, maybe not than we expected, but the scouts need to see. He's going to have to be, based on his tape, based on the way that he's played the last couple of years, he's going to have to show more athleticism than he did on the field. And that's probably not fair to him to say it like that, but I think that's what scouts have to look for.
On the flip side, at linebacker, athleticism never been an issue for Brandon Smith. Apparently yesterday his cleats were a bit of an issue. Some sloppiness there. He talked about the just not being able to get that grip, and you saw him even during warmups kind of sliding around like he was on skates at certain points. That wasn't the prettiest situation to pop up during his positional drill work. But again, he goes out here, puts together a 6.94 in the 3-cone, a 4.08 in the shuttle. He already had that 4.52 that he let stand from the combine. Coming out of the combine, Sean, in a lot of these athletic testing drills, he was top 5 among linebacker peers out in Indianapolis. He was able to build upon some of those results on Thursday. And I think it's going to come down to the question for these NFL talent evaluators. And there's guys like this on every roster across college football looking to make the leap to the league. But what are you measuring versus what you see now versus what you think you can do with somebody in a 2-year span to validate picking him perhaps on day 2? That's going to be the question. I'm curious if he's tantalizing enough because, again, you stand eye to eye with a lot of these guys afterward. No one is more physically impressive, and there's a lot of guys who are impressive, but no one is more physically impressive than Brandon Smith. Yeah,
he's a presence, no doubt about it. But that's the thing. The film is going to be over it like a cloud, just hovering over him. But the athleticism, man, just continues to pile up. I mean, the numbers that he put up in Indy, the 4.52, the 10.8 broad, to complement that with a 4.08 shuttle, somebody's going to fall in love with this guy. I keep saying it over and over. And that's pretty much been the scouting report from us is yes, the tape is not as good as you would like it to be, but those athletic numbers, it just takes one. And it'll be interesting to see because you get these anonymous scouts popping up at this point, and people are going to trash him. Like I think people are going to come out and say that his tape sucks and he does not move like a linebacker, does not play like a linebacker, things like that. But I think there's going to be probably more misdirection and things with Brandon Smith than anybody else in this Penn State recruiting class, this Penn State draft class.
think quietly Castro Fields has built himself a nice draft resume over the last couple of months. Obviously played a ton of football for Penn State, not as much as he would have liked his last couple of years on campus, but he was interesting. He talked about wishing he had made a few more plays in the open field, but he was really, really confident and proud of the pass coverage that he put on film last year. And I think that's the feedback he's gotten from a lot of NFL this dialogue. And he really, really held firm with that yesterday and saying not necessarily that he felt underappreciated at Penn State, but there was a sense that maybe he felt like because he wasn't getting thrown at and he wasn't recording stats, that maybe some of the elements of his game weren't necessarily spotlighted the way they could have been. Now, it's going to be up to what the NFL scouts to see and where they select him to kind of confirm where Castro Fields' head is. But he's put up good numbers. He had a 4.38 out in Indy. Of course, there's a lot of speedy cornerbacks, but he held up well among the top tier of that group out in Indy. 4.06 shuttle yesterday, a 7.05 cone. That's solid. And then I just think the 37-inch vertical stands out to me. He showed some of that explosiveness. He got up there and a guy that played a ton of football for Penn State, but going into this process, if you ask the average fan to name 6 draft prospects from the Nittany Lions, I don't know if they'd list Castro Fields. A little bit out of sight, out of mind for some reason with this process.
Tyler, I have no idea where Tariq Castro Fields is going to go in this draft. I mean, you can make an argument for 3rd round, you can make it for 7th round. I mean, I think he's going to get drafted. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. And we talked about that last fall when Penn State was playing really well and that secondary was playing really, really well. You had a situation where he would get, he'd fall down on a double move or something like that. And the secondary was so good. He was the perceived weak link, even though there really wasn't a weak link in that secondary. So I'm really curious to see what the football people come away with his tape. And you're right. He did have some things and he admitted some things that, it could have been more physical. He had some times that he got turned around. But at the same time, I mean, you look at some of the guys that have been drafted over the years and there are questions and bigger questions than you had with Tariq Castro Fields. So I have no idea where this one's going to play out. I haven't really seen any 7-round mocks or anything like that to know where he would fall. But I think he's going to be a guy that does hear his name called, and he certainly checks all the athletic boxes. It's just a matter of figuring out where he can fit.
Just a couple more names to get to, one of which we had on the show not too long ago. Jesse Luketa had a lot of momentum going to Indianapolis. Unfortunately, he was hobbled up in the 40-yard dash out there. He stuck with the 4.89 40-yard dash from the combine. I don't know if that reflects kind of where his health status was going into Thursday, but he was a relatively full participant. 36.5-inch vertical, a 10 flat broad, a 4.27 shuttle, 6'3", pushing 260 pounds. I think we're certainly seeing that all-in mentality with defensive end right now, and I think that's where his fit's going to be at the next level. But he's another guy that, how much does what Jesse brings to you off the field in some of these meetings that he's in play into that conversation? NFL's a lot about athleticism, and nice guys are great, but they're going to value a lot of the athletic testing. That's not on Jesse Luketa's side. We didn't necessarily think it would be, but I'm curious to see where his draft stock is a month from now, because he got off to a hot start with this process, and then because of what happened in Indianapolis, how that played out, it could put a damper on that progress a little bit.
Yeah, hurt the hamstring in Indy, and then he had that 4.89, which we were ballparking him in the high 4.6, maybe right around 4.7. So that's not that's going to hover over him as well. I mean, that was your big question, was the straight line speed, and he did not answer that question. It's going to be tough for him to overcome that. So maybe this is a situation where he slips a little bit. The tape's good. I mean, he's another guy that can get to the quarterback and give you positional flexibility, which is invaluable at that level. But there's going to be some questions about whether or not he's athletic enough and fast enough to hang in that league.
A couple more guys to get to, one of which did not work out, Rasheed Walker, Sean. And we certainly hope that he's going to be back on a field and a full participant, but we didn't see that on Thursday. We didn't see that when he was out in Indianapolis for the combine. He's having discussions with NFL decision makers, but right now he's not doing anything on the football field. And a big part of what we said, maybe Rasheed Walker could overcome the way his career ended on the football field, was to dazzle a bit with some of that athleticism. It was part of why he was a top 100 range recruit coming out. Thought maybe he could do some things in a combine setting. He's not going to have that chance. Maybe in a private setting moving forward, if he's healthy and cleared to do that. But yesterday he was in sweatpants and an observer, unfortunately.
Yeah, and just a reminder, he missed the last couple of games with an injury and did not work out in Indy because of that injury. He also didn't speak to the media, so we don't have an insight on
Yeah.
like where he's at in his recovery, why he didn't work out, whether it was a choice to not work out, whether he's not cleared, anything like that. So I hesitate to talk about whether he worked out or not, or how he, or what choices he made, because we don't have all the information there. But yeah, it's a situation where he had an opportunity to help himself, and did he maximize that with interviews and things like that? We just don't know. So that is a big question mark, and it's another one of those guys that has a wide range, because the talent's there, that there's a lot going for him, but at the same time you add injury questions into that, and then all of a sudden that changes some things. So I don't know what's going to happen with Walker. I don't know what's going to happen with Eric Wilson. You got a chance to speak with Eric Wilson. He was on the podcast last year before he joined the team at Penn State. Obviously, effusive guy, great attitude and everything like that. Not the most physically imposing, not the most athletic guy out there, but he's certainly fun to talk to. We'll see if he gets a chance to go somewhere in a camp.
Yeah, he kind of came across as a guy playing with house money. He talked about having that psychology degree from Harvard in his back pocket, the experience of being a full-time starter for Penn State for an entire season, just what he got to experience at the Power 5 level at the program with the prestige of Penn State. Obviously, he's very proud of that. He in terms of trying to continue his career at the professional setting, he's working at center a little bit. He's basically trying to prove that he can be that interior swing presence for a team, that a flexibility can do a lot to open up a practice squad role for an offensive lineman. I don't necessarily know if Eric Wilson will spend the next 3 years trying to scrap his way onto an NFL roster, or if he's going to give it a shot now and then turn his attention elsewhere. But he was fun to talk with. And I know people weren't necessarily blown away by what he brought to the football field at left guard. But what would the offensive line have looked like without him? Well, it's a slippery slope to go down, and we've already gone down that a bit. So we'll find out. But he was the guy that we enjoyed talking to a bit. And by the way, a quiet day for Jordan Stout. He did a lot of work out at the combine. He did a lot of work at the Senior Bowl. I think they've seen enough punting and kicking out of Stout, and he's going to basically wait to see if he's the first specialist off the board. And anytime a specialist is drafted, period, that's a legitimate achievement.
Yeah, I can't wait to see him. I guess the roof was probably not high enough for him to punt or something like that. So we'll see what happens with Stout. Should be one of the first 2 punters off the board. And obviously he's been great to us. So we wish all these guys the best of luck. Focusing on the next group, Penn State's got a visit weekend. You called it a big visit weekend earlier in the open of the show. It's probably, I wouldn't label it as a big visit weekend. You're just getting into the swing of things with camp. You want to get your guys, focus on the team first and then bring some guys in. I think the next couple of weekends will probably be a little bit bigger. And we before we get to this weekend, you focus on April 8th and you say, there's some big time guys that are probably coming up. Brandon Inniss, the number 1 wide receiver in the country from South Florida, Santana Fleming from South Florida, Marcus Stokes, the quarterback from the Jacksonville area. So it seems like there's a theme here. They're trying to get guys up that weekend of April 8th, some Florida guys to be comfortable around other Florida guys. You might see some names. Mark Fletcher's running back, some other guys at American Heritage could pop up that weekend, but that's a connection that Jaywan Sider has with the South Florida Express guys. And, it's one of those situations where you're probably trying, and these are all unofficial visits, by the way, probably trying to set the table to get these guys back for an official visit. Cause that's where you're going to have that chance is getting them on campus multiple times, getting them around the official visit, the official visit atmosphere and things like that. And that's where you've had your most successful Florida guys. So looking ahead a couple of weeks, there's some big timers on the horizon for Penn State.
There's been a bit of a mix with misses and hits and getting guys from Florida and what they did with the program. But we've seen Jaywan Sider make it happen where you get that 48-hour stretch with the official visit, have mom and dad on campus with you, and all of a sudden within the next month, the guy's on board and he's heading to campus months later as a Nittany Lion. So I think you're right. You got the South Florida Express kind of collection here, and so your mind starts to wonder who's going to be part of that. That is one of the premier 7-on-7 programs across the country, and Inniss, of course, a headliner here as the top wide receiver. So we'll see what comes there. Marcus Stokes, he's an interesting name, that 2023 quarterback class. Maybe that guy who is going to blow up a little bit here in the upcoming months. He's already on his way toward that. Penn State offer was part of that process because that 2023 quarterback class, some of the names that we were familiar with early, things are evolving there. Of course, Penn State is following up a 2 quarterback class with the number 1 guy in the 2022 cycle. So that is interesting to me. But this weekend, Sean, which to me, everything feels big in the spring weekends because after 2 years of no spring weekends.
Yeah, you're right.
They've got a 2024 quarterback coming to town. There's a pretty significant group coming from Maryland, but Michael Van Buren is a guy who was on the target board early for Mike Yurcich and company.
What a remarkable story. This was not even St. Francis's starter last year. And then their number 1 went down and he had to go to De La Salle in California and play on national TV as his first start. He only threw 4 touchdown passes. No big deal. Penn State, Michigan offered. He still did not go back to being a full-time starter. So This is a guy that I think I'm going to see him on Sunday at the Under Armour camp in Baltimore. But he showed incredible poise for a kid that you just kind of threw in there cold. But he's coming up. It's a big group from St. Francis, and you want to get those guys. I know Penn State, no luck at St. Francis. Of course, last year, Andre Roy and Jay Sean Barham were the big ones there, but you got to continue plugging away. There's as much talent there as there is. Then you got to try Edris Farouk, who's Jaleel Farouk's younger brother. There's a couple other guys. There's one on there that I'm just not even going to try. Check out the list later. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but you got to get those guys back on campus as much as possible. Beyond that, Jalen McClain's a kid that I really like, a cornerback out of New Jersey, Seton Hall Prep. He's going to be in this weekend as a 2024 kid. There's some intriguing 2023s here. Kyle Parker coming up from Texas is a receiver that they've offered. Colby Young, who we talked about on the show before from Lackawanna. He's going to be in this weekend. I know you talked to KP Price from Calvert Hall over the week. Really intriguing kid. I like this kid a lot. I don't know if he's a Penn State level kid, but he's a tall, rangy guy that's got corner experience, could be a safety, could be a linebacker at the next level. Not sure how he's going to fill out, but KP Price is an intriguing one when talking about potential offers in the 2023 class.
He showed really good ball skills last year as a junior, 6'2", 175 right now. So you love that kind of frame and how you could maybe fill that out within your defensive secondary. Brent Pry liked him enough to extend an offer last month on behalf of Virginia Tech. A lot of ACC interest right now. He's going to get to Clemson and Boston College. Those visits upcoming, but Penn State's first on the docket this Saturday. He was on campus for a couple of prospect camps last year. So this is a guy that should be pretty well documented by the Penn State staff in terms of some measurables and some testing numbers. We'll see if they want him back here for another camp in the summer. Not offered at this stage, as you mentioned. But a little bit interesting here. He mentioned the dream school, and we hear that a lot. And when I asked what would an offer mean from Penn State, he said, well, this is my dream school. So clearly it would mean a lot. But then he threw in something that certainly was a curveball to me. He said his mother was going to come to Penn State, but then she had him. So that didn't happen. So there is a real personal attachment here, it sounds like, where if Penn State were to pull the trigger, haven't seen a lot of Big Ten movement in his recruitment, but if they continue that trend and add another offer, it's one that is instantly going to turn his head. And KP Price is a guy that Penn State likes as a safety, but he does have some Power 5 interest at cornerback as well.
Yeah, and I think he's listed at 6'2", 175. So it's a question: is he 6'2"? Is he over 6'2"? Or is he 6 foot? I mean, we will see, and that will probably dictate some of the movement where that position lands and things like that. But he's a good player. There's a couple of good players that are up this weekend. So I hesitate to call it a big weekend, but it's still every weekend that you can get, you got to maximize the opportunity and get some of these guys back onto campus over and over again.
And among the commits or signees who are in town, you've got the 5-star offensive lineman Alex Birchmeyer back in town. I think anytime you have his feet on campus, doing some peer recruiting and just showing that loyalty to the Nittany Lions, that's a great sign. And he has repeatedly been that kind of a presence for the 2023 class. So he'll be in town. There was a midweek visitor that popped up, and you had this reported out, and there's been a follow-up, 247 Sports story from Alan True on it. But Ohio defensive end Michael Kilbane has an offer from the Nittany Lions, and he made a midweek trip. There were some midweek visitors that popped up, and that's what you expect during spring practice now.
Second trip this calendar year for Michael Kilbane. He's got, the who's who in that region have offered him, except for Ohio State for the most part. Just kind of looking at the Michigan States, the West Virginians and things like that. Penn State probably, I would say, his biggest offer to date. Good player, 16.5 sacks last year. A guy that Penn State likes. I'm curious where he fits in the microcosm of, or just when you're breaking up the board, you've got those top guys, then you've got that next tier. He's probably in that next tier, but where does he fit among those other pass rushers that next tier? That's the question I have coming out of this. Liam Andrews, the top offensive lineman in New England in the 2024 class. He stopped by this week as well. So they've been getting some guys in week, but most of these have been focused on the weekend. Kilbane's a guy that I keep going back to. I could see him ending up in this class. It's just a matter of, is Penn State ready to push and go all in on a guy like that?
Last recruiting note from me to get to here. Let's go back down to Florida. Treon Webb at Trinity Christian Academy in Jacksonville. That, of course, is the program where Ken Miller starred last year as a senior. He's coming in as a cornerback for Penn State this year. But Treon Webb, very talented and prized running back prospect, has a top 5. A bit of a breakdown on that up on Lions247 right now. But Penn State, not surprisingly here, involved in that mix for Treon Webb. And it talked about bringing in a quarterback after what you did last signing day. You brought in 2 top 24/7 running backs, Katron Allen, and oh, by the way, number 1 in the class, Nick Singleton. So J1 Slater has stacked classes, and he's done it with Florida guys. And here we go again.
Yeah, Treon Webb with the top 5: Florida, Baylor, Penn State, Tennessee, South Carolina. I got 4 of those. I think that we were guessing them on one of the shows like last month or something like that. I got 4 of them. I did not see Baylor coming, to be honest with you. I thought Georgia might be in there. He was previously committed to Georgia, previously committed to Oklahoma. Neither of those teams on there. So we'll see. He's got visits lined up. He's going to check out Penn State once again. He came for a game in November. We'll check out Penn State once again on an official visit in June. We'll see where it goes from there. The running back board, I hesitate to call it interesting because I don't know that it's that interesting. You got Webb, you got Mark Fletcher, who we talked about. The offer to London Montgomery is out there, so we're going to see what Penn State's intentions are here in the night.
The in-state offer, the in-state offers. But a lot to sort through, and certainly there'll be more to look at coming out of this weekend because of the visitors and the guys that are going to pop up on Saturday. Spring practice number 3 on Saturday. We're expecting more practice access next week, opportunity to speak with coaches and players. So we'll break all that down, more recruiting. We'll see if the transfer portal produces something for Penn State here in the coming weeks. Stay with us on the Lions247 podcast. On behalf of Sean Fitz and our producer, Lance Glenn, we'll get to a 5-star mailbag next episode. Have a great weekend. I'm Tyler Donohue. This is the Lions247 podcast.